Welcome to the 2023 World Cup. This 206-player tournament features some of the greatest chess players in the world, players like Magnus Carlsen, Hikaru Nakamura, and more. Today, I'll be going over some of the best games from day one of the tournament, so let's get started. To start us off, we've got the game between International Master Ediz Gurel and Grandmaster Velimir Ivic. Ediz Gurel is the youngest player in this year's World Cup. He's only 15 years old, and here he had the white pieces. So Ivic played c5 in this position, and white played d takes c5. d4 was played, so trying to get this rook to move off of the c file so that black can play bishop takes c5 and win their pawn back. After rook g3 was played, black went bishop takes c5, and here Gurel found a crushing sequence, which started with the move bishop takes h7. After bishop takes h7, so you sacrifice the bishop, black takes this bishop, and queen h5 check was played. King g8 was the response, and white played queen h6, threatening mate on g7. So black had to go g6 to prevent this, and here white played knight e4, threatening both the bishop and going knight f6 check, which would be absolutely crushing. So black responds with bishop e7 here. And here, white finds the quiet but extremely powerful move that wins the game on the spot, the move rook f3. The point of rook f3 is simply to reinforce this idea of knight f6 check. So if white gets a knight f6 check, bishop takes f6, e takes f6, it's game over because mate's going to be on g7. So to prevent this, black played bishop f5 to try and cut the rook off from the f6 square. However, white saw this coming and they played the move rook takes f5. After after black would go g takes f5, white can play knight f6 check and win with queen g7 mate. So that's why black decided to delay the inevitable with the move rook a6 here. However, white has a winning move here, which Gurel found. It's absolutely lovely. He played the move rook f3, simply retreating the rook back to the f3 square. And now you see the point that by getting rid of this light squared bishop, rook h3 is now a possibility. And it's pretty much unstoppable. Rook h3 will be played, and white will mate on the h file. So that's why after rook f3, Ivic resigned. He decided to throw in the towel, and Ediz Gurel won his first game of this year's World Cup. Alright, next up, we've got the game between Grandmaster Eduardo Iturrizaga and Ganzorig Amartuvshin. So Iturrizaga is from Spain, and Amartuvshin is from Mongolia. And here, white played the move g4. So Iturizaga's point is that we've got some opposite sides castling here, so he wants to push on the king side, while Amartuvshin probably wants to start opening up things on the queen side. So here black goes b4 in response, and white trades on b4. And here white plays a very interesting move. He plays the move knight g6. So this move looks very strange at first, but the point is that if f takes g6 is played, white can go bishop takes c5, bishop takes c5, and d6 check, which is a discovered check. And after white picks up this bishop on the next move, they will be doing very well because they're going to be attacking many things. So that is why knight g6 is sound. However, the only thing stranger than the move knight g6 is the move that black played in response, which was knight b3 check. So completely ignoring the fact that we have an attack here and saying, okay, you can have this knight, but you can't have it on c5. You can take it on b3 instead. And after this, black plays f takes g6. And now you see the point that because the knight's not on c5, there is no bishop takes c5 and d6 check to worry about. So in this position, white decided to get their bishop to safety with the move bishop a2. Black played rook e b8 in response, and white played rook d2. So defending the b2 pawn, which was being attacked. And here, Amartuvshin played g5. So the point is that you want to clamp down on this f4 square with your pawns. And he has a very interesting idea in the next few moves. So after rook c2, black actually played knight h7. So the idea is now rerouting this knight to f4 via f8 and g6. So after rook c2, knight h7, king b1 was played, a5, king a1, rook hc1, knight f8, and now king a1, getting this king in the corner, trying to tuck it away. Knight g6 was played, and white played knight e2. So trying to contest the knight that's coming into f4. And here black makes an inaccuracy because he played the move bishop a4, but this allows a nice tactic by white, which is the move rook takes c7. And the idea of rook takes c7 is very similarly related to this idea of knight h4 to g6, which was played earlier, which is the use of this a2 bishop. So here the a2 bishop looks dead, but if black were to take this rook, then d6 check would be absolutely disastrous, and this bishop would come alive. And white would win a ton of material and probably win the game shortly thereafter. So after rook c7, or rook takes c7 rather, black plays queen f8, maintaining this blockade on the d6 square. And here white actually blunders with the move rook 7 c4. Now white's idea with this move is that if black does not trade, if they play something like rook takes b2, then the a4 bishop would hang. So that was white's idea. Unfortunately, black can get away with this. Rook takes b2 was played in the game, and after rook takes a4, black went knight f4. So here it looks like black is down a piece, but you see the problem is that they have a ton of pressure. The first thing to note is that they completely control the b file, so white's king in the corner is going to be feeling like it's in a lot of danger soon. The second thing is that they have this really nasty pin on the e2 knight that is currently being attacked. And really also, this knight can jump into d3 and cause all sorts of problems. So white wants to get rid of this knight by playing bishop takes f4, as Iturrizaga did in the game. However, after e takes f4, despite the fact that white is up, I believe, a full piece, white's completely losing, because now that e takes f4 has been played, this bishop on d6 will become a monster when it gets to e5, and will cause all sorts of problems for the white king on a1. After something like queen f6 and bishop e5, the discoveries are completely endless for the black position here. So after this, white goes queen e1, and already black can capitalize on this by playing rook takes e2. And you see the point that if white goes queen takes e2 in this position, then bishop e5 check will force white to basically give up all of their pieces, because the rook cuts off the king, and this bishop on e5 is an absolute beast. So after rook takes e2, white tries to hold on with the move queen c3, but this holding off of the bishop getting to e5 is only temporary, because after queen e8 is played, bishop e5 is a threat once again, and queen takes a4 is a threat. White tries to circumvent this with rook d4, hoping that maybe if bishop e5 is played, he can get in d6 check and try and make something happen. However, Amartuvshin simply moves his king to h8, getting out of danger, and after queen c4, hitting this rook, black can actually ignore this and play bishop e5, because if you take this rook, then bishop takes d4 will win the game, because once again, white's king is in the absolute worst spot on a1 for this dark squared bishop, right? So after bishop e5, white can't take the rook. They go rook d1, saying, okay, I hope that you take my rook. Unfortunately, after bishop takes d4 and queen takes d4, the move rook b4 ends the game immediately, and I'll show you why in a second. So basically, the queen has a few places it can go, but the key is that if you remove the queen from this diagonal right here, let's say with the move queen a7, for example, then queen e5 check rather is going to be completely devastating, because white's king is completely cut off. So you have to give up all this material, and white's obviously losing. So in order to survive, you have to keep the queen on this diagonal and make sure queen e5 isn't possible. However, here black has a nice trick with rook takes a2, and it's going to be made soon. So after king takes a2, we have this nice little ladder, and if you block, then black can play queen c2 check, and then pick up the rook with check, and then mate on b1. So black would be winning regardless of whether you or where you put the queen. So after rook b4, Iturrizaga realized this, and he resigned. So that gives Amartuvshin his first win in the World Cup. Alright, up next, I want to highlight some very impressive endgame technique by Gianmarco Leiva from Peru against his opponent Anton Demchenko, who plays for Slovenia. So in this position, Leiva had white, and he played the move queen g5 check here. So notice that here, white's up 2 pawns, but the position is kind of dangerous because queen h3 check is a problem, and currently black is preventing white from queening. So to deal with queen h3, Leiva decides that the best course of action is to trade the queens at the cost of a pawn. So after queen g5, queen takes g5 is played, h takes g5, and here you don't want to go king takes g5 if you're black, because after bishop e7, the pawn is queening. So Demchenko decides to play bishop c8 first, covering the squares and making sure that the pawn can't promote for a while. And next up is king takes g5. And here white plays the move king h2, and after king takes g5, Leiva displays some very impressive technique. So he starts with the move bishop g2. Now the idea of bishop g2 is that he simply wants to go bishop h3 and offer a trade of the bishops, and obviously black doesn't want that, so they'll move their bishop away, and then white can queen the pawn, and the extra piece will be enough to win this pretty simple ending. So after bishop g2, black can't go king g4, because then bishop h3 is just a nice skewer there. So after bishop g2, black is forced to play the move king h4. And after king h4, we have this problem where we want to go bishop h3, but the problem is that bishop takes h3 will have black defending the bishop, right? So you want this king to move away. So here white decides to play bishop f1, and the idea is that, okay, now if you move the king, then bishop h3 comes. And once again, if you move the bishop, so let's say like bishop b7, then bishop h3 comes like this, and then you queen. And if bishop d7 or bishop e6 or whatever, then bishop a6 can be played, and we're queening, right? So in this case, white's pretty happy because they just want to make black make any move, and then they're going to be in a winning position. But here black plays f3, right? It's the one move that keeps the game going a little bit longer. And now here's the problem, is that we want to basically make it so that it's black's turn to move, so that they have to move their king back, and then we can go bishop h3, or they move the bishop and we can queen the pawn, right? However, it's not black's move, it's white's move. And you can't play bishop g2 because the pawn takes away the square. So white's forced to get their bishop outside, so bishop h3 is not possible. But here Leiva recognizes something very interesting, which is the concept of wasting a move. He plays the move bishop c4, and after black goes king g4, he plays the move bishop b5. And after bishop b5, black simply returns to h4, and now he plays bishop f1. And we have reached the exact same position as before, except now, because he's wasted a move, he's played bishop c4, then bishop b5, and then come back. It's black's turn to move here, right? Before it was white's turn. And now black actually resigned in this position because after the king moves or the bishop moves, black will be losing, right? King g4 is bishop h3 check. King back, bishop h3 forces the queening of the c7 pawn, and moving the bishop allows the pawn to promote, moving the bishop either way. So this is how white won this game, and it illustrates this concept of wasting a move by going bishop c4 and then bishop b5. So this is very useful, and it's not only useful in positions like this. In a lot of endings, this concept of making it black's turn to move in a position where it was your turn, when it was white's turn to move, is very useful. So Leiva displayed this really nice technique here, and he was able to defeat his opponent, who was rated about 300 points above him. So great job to him, and he gets his first win at the 2023 World Cup. Alright guys, for the last game today, I'm going to show you a game between Grandmaster Timur Gareyev from the United States and Grandmaster Emilio Cordova from Peru. In this position, Gareyev had the white pieces, and knowing his aggressive attacking and creative style, it's no surprise that he came up with the move knight d5 in this position. Now, knight d5 is one of those moves that is not objectively sound, but it's pretty difficult to play with black after, because after e takes d5 and c takes d5, you'll see that white only has a pawn for the piece in terms of compensation. However, black's going to have some difficulties to deal with if he wants to retain his advantage. So after c takes d5, black goes knight e5. Cordova could have also played knight d8, but he chose to try and trade off some pieces, knowing the fact that he is up some material. So after knight e5, white traded on e5, d takes e5, and Timur takes the opportunity to take away the castling rights for black here. He plays bishop b5 check. King f8 was played, and white castles. And already white's thinking about moves like f4, trying to break open lines against the black king, because right now the king's on f8, where it definitely does not want to be. So after white castles, black plays a6, trying to kick out white's bishop, but white decides to put the bishop on c6 and sort of dare black to take this bishop. Cordova ends up playing bishop takes c6, but after d takes c6, you'll see that this is probably a mistake, because this pawn on c6 is going to be a huge thorn in black's side in this position. And after the move queen e8, you'll see that white simply picks up the pawn on e5 as well. Black went queen e8 because at the moment, trying to blockade the pawn with something like queen c7 may not be so wise, considering the fact that you generally don't want to blockade a pawn with a piece as powerful as the queen. You don't want to relegate that queen to that role in the game. And he thought it was better to play queen e8, try and go rook c8 and win the pawn this way. But this does come at the cost of bishop takes e5. Also, after something like queen c7, f4 may have been a problem. But after bishop takes e5, black goes rook c8, and white gladly pushes his pawn to c7. So now it's defended by 2 pieces, and it's going to be very difficult to win this pawn. So after c7 was played, black goes h5, trying to maybe do a few things. The first is to get this rook out. Maybe also black wants to castle by hand and make some luft for the king. Also, maybe he wants to use this as an anchor for something like knight g4 in the future. Regardless, h5 was played, and white plays rook d3, which is a very useful move because the rook can both swing to the king side or stay on the queen side with something like rook c3, defending this c pawn, or maybe making an avenue through c6 to try and pick up the remaining queen side pawns. So after rook d3, black goes rook h6, developing the rook. White goes bishop f4, attacking this rook, and rook g6 is played. So after rook g6, white decides to go e5 and force this knight to an awkward square. So black goes knight h7 here, and you'll see that white still only has a pawn for the piece. However, black's pieces are so awkward, and the king is still on f8, which is a slightly dangerous position for it to be in, and the rook on g6 looks a bit weird. Combined with the fact that white has this very strong pawn on c7, the computer actually evaluates this position as objectively better for white, despite the fact that white only has a pawn for the piece. But after knight h7, it's very important that white plays precisely, because it's one of those positions where if you start making moves that go astray, then the side with the extra piece will eventually come out on top and make a comeback. So after knight h7, white goes rook c3, so making sure that rook c6 is not playable. And after rook c3, black goes king g8, so successfully castling by hand, sort of, getting the rook out through this h-file. White plays bishop e3, so targeting the b6 pawn, and black goes a5. After a5, we have a trade on a5, and here white plays rook b1. And I thought a5 might have not been that great of a move, because after this trade and rook b1, you'll see that this rook has a nice avenue to get to b8 in the future, and this could be very problematic for black. Because if white's able to play something like bishop a7 and rook b8, and maybe bring the other rook into b8, then you start to remove the defenders and the blockaders of this c7 pawn that wants to get to c8 and become a queen, and then you have some real problems there. So after rook b1, black plays rook a6, probably playing to meet any future rook b8 with the move rook a8. So that's why rook a6 was played. Also, it defends the a pawn if it is attacked, but after rook a6, white plays h3, simply making luft for the king. By the way, luft means like space, so that the king can potentially move, especially in the case of some back rank attacks. So after h3, black plays knight f8. The point of knight f8 is simply to reroute this knight to a better square like e6, where the knight may be more stable and also put pressure on this c7 pawn as well. So white goes f4, and black plays h4. So f4 wants to gain some space in the center, and h4 simply clamps down on white's position. If black were able to get a knight to g3, they could potentially set up mating nets in the future as well. That's one of the themes that you need to look for when black gets the pawn to h4, and they can get a clamp on this g3 square. Also, it kind of messes up white's pawn structure a little bit because the g2 pawn now is sort of clamped down by this h pawn. So after h4, white plays f5, and here this restricts black's knight, and black plays knight d7 here. Now, this is one of the key things that I want to point out about this game, which is why I thought it was so important to review this specific game, is that here white is down a piece, but they have a pawn in exchange for it, which normally is not enough compensation, but in this specific scenario, these two center pawns are very strong, and this c7 pawn ties down a lot of black's pieces. Now, when you have the extra piece, you want to look for squares for that piece. You want to look for ways to make that piece stand out and be useful and take advantage of the fact that you have this extra piece. Now, here it's problematic because this knight is kind of boxed in by these pawns. You couldn't go to e6 with the knight from f8. You can't go to f6 now, and you just have trouble finding good squares for this knight. The knight can't go to these squares because it'll be captured. So in that sense, white wants to keep his pawns on squares where they're far enough advanced where they can potentially cause an attack with something like f6 or e6 in the future. But right now, they're also very useful with the task of restricting black's extra piece, which is this knight, and making it look kind of useless. So after knight d7 was played, white goes queen d3. Now, queen d3 is actually a mistake, but the reason why is pretty difficult to understand. Black can take advantage of this move with the move rook c6 in this position. So here he played rook a8, which is reasonable because the rook is under attack. But he could have played, or Cordova could have played the move rook c6, which looks strange at first, but after rook takes c6, you realize that black is not simply giving away a whole rook. They can play knight takes e5, winning a pawn, and then forking the queen and rook. So after knight takes c6, black's defending their knight, so they've come up with a pawn out of this, and they'll probably be winning here because now they just have a full piece, and a lot of the threats have been neutralized. Note that you can't play knight takes e5 here, obviously, because the rook hangs, so that's why rook c6 is recommended by the computer. However, Cordova didn't see this, which is understandable. It's a tough move to find, and also I'm not entirely sure about the time situation at this moment in the game. So he played the move rook a8, and here white played e6. And I thought this was not a great move because of what I described earlier, is that these pawns were far enough advanced to where they restricted this knight completely. Now, when you try and move them further and cause problems in black's position, the downside is that you're opening up all these different squares for this black knight to jump into. So after knight f takes e6, f takes e6, here black goes knight f8, and you realize this pawn has these two pawns that were before looked so menacing, and they sort of clamp down black's position. Now it's just one pawn, and it's a potential target. Yes, it's hindering black's position and making it a bit awkward for him to unravel his pieces and so forth, but it's also going to become a target, and this is a problem when black has an extra piece. So here white goes queen d5, trying to defend this pawn, but now black brings this rook back to a6 to attack it. It's kind of funny how this rook went from h8 and then came out this way and then made its way all the way to a6 back, and now it's back on a6. But black is making good use of this rook because this pawn is extremely vulnerable here. After rook a6, white plays rook e1, and this is actually a blunder. So the problem with rook e1 is that white's intention with it is to make use of the fact that if black plays something like rook takes e6, which is what happened in the game, that this pin on the rook is going to be dangerous. So that's why rook e1 is played. So after rook takes e6, white went bishop f2, and you think, okay, now I can make use of this pin because black can't move the rook, and then sort of pile up on this rook and cause some serious problems. However, black has a really neat way to get out of this, which he played in this game. He played the move queen d7. And Cordova's idea with queen d7 is that if you take the queen, if white takes the queen, you're not going to recapture with the knight because then you lose protection of this rook. So then rook takes e6 is simply winning. Instead, after queen d7, if white takes the queen, now there's no pin. So you can throw in this intermediate move, rook takes e1, and after bishop takes e1, knight takes d7, black gets an extra pawn, and they're going to be totally winning because they've sort of weathered the storm. So after knight takes d7, that would be the issue. So after queen d7, white realizes that, he can't go into this, so he plays queen c4 instead. But now black can start to unravel their position and start to make use of their extra piece. So now white only has this one c7 pawn as compensation for the piece. And it's simply not enough in this position because black's going to start mobilizing their pieces. So after bishop f6, white goes rook c1, queen f7, breaking the pin, rook takes e6, knight takes e6. And here black has way too many attackers on this pawn. So white decides to give it up in exchange for the a pawn. He plays queen a6 here. Black goes rook takes c7. We have a trade. Note that you can't take with the queen because the knight on e6 would hang. So knight takes c7 and queen takes a5. Now here black's up a piece. White does have an extra a pawn for it, but unfortunately one extra pawn is simply not enough. And Cordova in this game displays a very strong understanding of the power of the queen and knight combination. And getting these minor pieces into the game and attacking white's king specifically from here. So this is going to be a very nice display of technique from him. So here he goes queen c4, queen c5 was played, trying to offer an exchange of queens. White wants to desperately trade the queens so that maybe they can survive an ending. Note that the bishop is one of those, we have these situations where the bishop is on the wrong color. And what that means is that if white were able to somehow liquidate this position down to, let's say they trade the queens, and then many more trades occur that black has this at the end of the trades, black has a bishop and an h-pawn, it would be a draw because this square is a light square and it's a dark squared bishop. So that white at least has that going for them. So maybe they want to get into an ending where that's possible and trade off a bunch of pawns and see if they can get there. However, black wants no part of this. They want to use their extra piece to attack and keep the queens on the board, which is smart because white really has nothing here. They can only hope to hold on or throw in some spite checks. But after queen f4, white goes queen c2. Knight d5 was played, queen c8 check, king h7, queen c2, g6. These checks are not a big deal. After queen d1, you're attacking this knight, but black actually doesn't care. He plays the move bishop e5 because if you take on d5, black has queen c1 check. Note that the h2 square is covered, so white would have to give up the bishop and basically get checkmated. That's why you can't take the knight. So after bishop e5, white goes queen e1, and black plays knight c3. Note that you can't take on h4 here because of queen h2 and then queen h1. So white has to play queen e3, trying to get the king to run if queen h2. However, once again, black does not want to trade the queens. He plays the move queen f5, and after queen a7 checks, some more spite checks. g5 is played, queen e1. White is simply waiting here, and black goes king g6, simply improving their position a little bit more. And after queen f4, threatening a check on h2 and a lot of problems after that, white goes bishop e3 and queen c4 is played. And now black has really put their pieces in the optimal squares. The knight on c3 and the queen on c4 are menacing with threats like knight e2 check roaming in the air, and the bishop can plant itself on g3. And here Timur blundered with the move queen f1, which is understandable because it's a very tough position to play. And here after queen f1, after he played queen f1, he actually resigned because he probably saw that there are many moves like bishop h2 check, which would be a problem. So trying to deflect this king from the queen. Just one example, I believe, king f2, knight e4 check, king e1, and bishop g3 check simply wins the house because you're covering all the squares, and white would basically lose everything. So after queen f1, white realized he was going to lose, so Timur threw in the towel, and Cordova won a really nice game. He came back from this sort of weird scenario where he was up a piece, but still worse because of the compensation from white. But he managed to weather the storm and get into this nice ending, which he converted. So Cordova did a good job there, and he gets his first win in the 2023 World Cup. Thank you guys for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, feel free to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel for more educational chess videos.